Hardly working. I hate the dreams more than anything. I black out and a few minutes later I wake up rejuvenated, but a little confused. People seem to crowd over you when you're a narcoleptic, and they ask if you're okay. Of course, it's only sleep after all. But there has to be something wrong with you, right? To be wide awake one moment and asleep the next is not of the ordinary. I tend to agree with that fact, even after all the precautions I take. The key is in avoiding triggers. There is always a trigger. Some people pass out in moments of happiness or excitement. I tend to pass out whenever I'm completely surprised or startled. Once I even collapsed at my own surprise birthday party at work. In their defense, I had only worked there for 2 weeks and they couldn't have known. But imagine their surprise. I try not to. So even if I don't know when it will strike, I can stray from stressful environments, like racetracks or amusement parks, to name a few. But I rarely ever black out anymore. My life has become one of routine, and I'm fine with that. Sure, I can't go skydiving, but that isn't so much of a loss. I'm fine with taking my lunch breaks inside a cool and familiar park instead of some new place, some uncharted territory. It isn't such a scary disorder if you really look at it. It makes a lot of ordinary tasks a hazard, like driving for instance, but it's just sleep after all. The dreams are the real disadvantage. You see, my dreams always pick up from where I last left off. So, for example, if I pass out in my desk at work, my dream would kick in right away. In that dream, I would be typing away at my computer as if nothing had changed at all, and then something strange would happen. Let's say a clown would pop into my cubicle, juggling chainsaws and whistling. You can imagine my shock. This is supposed to be reality, and suddenly I'm part of my own private circus. Then maybe the clown switches on one of his chainsaws, and I am now in grave danger. Can you tell I hate clowns? Anyway, I wake up at my desk perfectly okay, but these dreams are traumatizing. When reality and fantasy blur, there's no telling what's real or not, and that's scary. Yes, I'm perfectly fine with taking my lunches in the park, thank you very much. It was close to noon when the cop sat down on the bench and wiped his brow. Was it getting hotter? He couldn't help but think of global warming in moments like these, where the sun was nothing more than a giant heat lamp burning into his dark uniform. Why had the force chosen black police uniforms, especially in the summer when they would be made to patrol the streets? He wouldn't be outside at all if it wasn't for the broken air conditioner in his cruiser. It was better to be fully exposed to the sun than be trapped inside that oven, losing 10 pounds solely through his sweat glands. He looked around the park. He was alone except for some joggers and 2 young kids with their skateboards. He shaded his eyes from the harsh glare. Maybe there was a sheltered bench farther down the trail he could rest on. He hitched up his pants as he stood up, but something pulled him back into a sitting position. His belt was caught on his seat, possibly on a nail. The kids were staring at him from across the way, whispering and pointing. He gave them a smug look, and they started to laugh. Without another thought, he tore out of the bench and hiked along the paved trail, scouting out a new place to sit. There was a perfect spot, just under the cover of a tree, but a guy was already there, chewing on a sandwich and staring off into space. He was just about to turn around and trek back to his cruiser when the man looked at him. They made eye contact, and the cop stepped forward. "Would you mind if I sat next to you?" he asked. "Of course." He made room for the officer. "I appreciate it," he replied. He folded into the bench, and it sank considerably. "That's much better. It's a scorcher." "It is hotter than usual," the man replied. The cop sighed and grabbed his knees. "You must have the best seat in the house right here." He inhaled through his nostrils and craned his neck to watch the trees sway. "This is always my bench. I never have to fight for it," the man said. "That must be nice." "So are you just taking a break? Escaping the sun?" "You could say that, working hard or hardly working, right?" the cop said with a laugh. The man heard loud voices over his shoulder and relaxed once he saw it was only a couple of kids playing around on their skateboards. "Thank God this bench was here, or I might have died from heat stroke," the officer said, his eyes closed and his feet stretched out. "I'm happy I could help." The boy popped his board into a sketchy ollie and lost his balance. He went pinwheeling into the grass. His friend laughed and continued up the trail. The boy applied pressure to his skinned elbow, forcing back tears of pain. His world was already starting to swim, but he managed to keep his composure. "Come on, sluggo," his friend cried from the top of the hill. "Wait up," he yelled back, scrambling to regain his footing. When he turned to find his skateboard, he found something different instead. There was a gun lying in the grass, only inches from his outsplayed fingers. At first he didn't know what to do. He stared at his own warped and inverted reflection inside the plated chrome. His eyes were wide. "What are you doing?" his friend asked. He was on the hill, making his way back down. The boy ignored the question and crawled under the bench to touch the gun. It was so cool under his fingers, regardless of the heat. He weighed the treasure in his hands. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever found. He'd seen guns on TV, and both the good and bad guys used them. They always pulled back the hammer, aimed the gun, and said some kind of clever tagline like, "Your time is up," before firing. "What are you looking at?" Friend asked, this time much closer. The boy jumped and knocked his head against the top of the bench. He cried out and rolled out into the sun, the gun held high. "Whoa, where'd you find that?" the friend screamed, reaching for the weapon. The boy pulled it back to his chest. Are you crazy? Shut up, he barked. His friend threw his hands over his mouth. His eyes were bugging out of their sockets, and his sneakers were dancing excitedly in the grass. It must be the cops, the boy explained as he got to his knees. He cradled the handgun in his arms. What should we do with it? His friend looked up the trail and spotted the cop on one of the far benches. I think we should take it, he said matter-of-factly. Really? Isn't stealing from a cop kind of like the worst thing you could do? Not if you don't get caught, his friend replied. Good enough for me. They both ran into the brush. Well, the cop said, inspecting his watch, I guess I should get going. The policeman stood up and hitched up his pants. You have a great day, the man told him. And you as well. Then he was gone, disappearing behind a group of trees. The man shrugged and finished his last bite of sandwich. A dollop of strawberry jam spotted his colored shirt, and he hastily rubbed at it. To his dismay, he was only able to make the stain a lot worse. He gave up and licked his fingers. He too checked his watch and figured he should stay a little while longer. The boys discarded their skateboards at the base of a tree, and through the foliage they could see the back of the bench and the cop as he walked away. The man had stayed behind to eat his lunch. Do you think he noticed it was missing? The boy asked. Nah, look how calm he looks. If he knew, he would be running around like an idiot, his friend assured him. The boy laughed and held the gun out for them both to see. It's so cool, his friend said. Let me hold it. No way, I found it. I get to hold it. Let me shoot it. What are you going to shoot at? You know, tin cans and stuff, like in the movies. Hey, stupid, do you see any tin cans? The boy snapped. Just let me hold it. Okay, fine, but don't shoot it, the boy said. He handed the gun over to his friend. The kid held it inches from his nose as if to sniff it, and then he aimed it through the bushes. He closed one of his eyes and lined up the sight with the back of the bench. What are you doing? The boy asked. He desperately grabbed for the gun, but his friend pulled away. I'm just playing, he insisted. He raised the gun so the nose was pointed directly at the man's head. Say goodnight, he whispered in homage to his favorite television program. Bang, he said. Bang! Okay, let me try, the boy said, wrestling for the gun. No, hold on, give me! The gun went off, and the man's head dropped. The boy scurried away from the bush, the gun lying dormant between them. Everything was silent. Look what you did, the friend cried with a hoarse voice. You did it! Yeah, but you were grabbing for it. Because you're a jerk. You're the jerk! They both turned back to the gun. Do you think we hurt anyone? The boy asked. They both peered through the bushes and gasped at the same time. The man was slouched in his seat, and he wasn't moving. The boy grabbed the pistol with shaking hands. For the second time that day, his world was starting to swim behind his tears. We should have never taken this. He threw the gun over the top of the bush and then started to cry. His friend grabbed him by the wrist and pulled him up onto his feet. We have to go, he screamed. We killed him! We killed him! Come on, we need to run! The boy followed his friend through the trees, his skateboard forgotten. The cop heard the shot just as he was entering the parking lot. 4 other people ducked to the ground on his left and right, but he only managed to throw his hands up to his head. Once he was able to collect his thoughts, he instinctively grabbed for the gun on his belt. Nothing was there. He tore at every one of his compartments, and even jammed his hands into his pockets, but without luck. He cursed under his breath and looked around him. The pedestrians were all staring at him with brimming eyes. He took a deep breath and tore open the door to his cruiser. First he thumbed the radio and called for backup, and then he freed the shotgun from its clip. He made sure it was safely loaded before he pumped it once. As he crept from one tree to the next, he went over his current situation with a clear head. Even when panic threatened to overcome him, he remembered how his belt had caught on the bench as he stood up. How could he have been so damn stupid? It just so happened to be one more thing he could blame on global warming. He peered out from behind a tree and held his breath. He could see the shady bench from his position, and the man was lying awkwardly in his seat, his eyes closed and his mouth hanging open. There was a red spot on his chest, bright and huge in the sunlight. He pressed his back flat against the tree. Then he heard some footsteps and he looked up. The kids were sprinting up the trail, headed the opposite way. Sensing they were in trouble, he immediately followed suit, his heart throbbing in his throat and his feet weighing heavy. This could be the end. There was someone out there with his gun. There was a man dead or dying, and there were children in danger, working hard or hardly working, he thought to himself. I can't help but laugh about it now, but there was one instance in the park where I blacked out for no real reason. I don't remember what triggered it. It must have been a loud noise that took me off guard. I don't know. It was the dream that I remembered. That loud noise must have carried into my sleep because I thought I'd been shot. In my dream, I was clutching at my chest, and there was blood spurting out between my fingers. I struggled out of my bench and limped into the parking lot. A policeman was waiting for me there with a heavy shotgun. I called out for help, but he didn't seem to listen. He grinned and shot me again in the stomach. That was when I woke up on the bench, the shade gone, and the sun now beating down on my face. I laughed off the dream and glanced at my watch. It was time for me to get back to work. Thank God my fainting spells only last a few minutes, or else I'd be unemployed. So I got up and made my way out of the park, fully refreshed. I talk about these dreams like they're nightmares, but I'm starting to realize they are somewhat of a relief. Sometimes I think I'd rather have a bad dream than a good dream. After dreaming that I married a swimsuit model, I feel much worse. I wake up and realize that I do not know a model and probably never will. That's pretty devastating for a guy in the middle of the night. But if I wake up at the end of a dream where I was shot and killed, it's a relief. I know that I'm still alive, and I'm a lot happier for it. I'd take the nightmare over the sex dream any day. You know, I seem to remember walking out of the park that day with a dozen cop cars in the parking lot with their sirens blazing. Do you recall what I said about fantasy and reality blurring together? Yeah, it's something. It's really something. You're just going to have to trust me there.